The fastest way to discover what your family really thinks about you is to suddenly come into money. Ashley raised her champagne glass so high the chandelier light caught the diamond bracelet on her wrist and scattered little stars across the dining room walls. "To my dad," she said, smiling wide enough for everyone at the table to see every perfect white tooth. "The man who finally did something useful by winning us $10 million. Laughter rolled through the room like warm smoke. Her realtor friends laughed. Brian laughed the loudest. Even the couple from down the street chuckled into their wine glasses like I was part of the entertainment they'd been promised after dessert. I sat at the far end of the table with my paper napkin folded in my lap and my hands wrapped around a sweating glass of iced tea. The steak on my plate had gone cold 15 minutes earlier. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they did and simply didn't care anymore. Funny how money changes the temperature in a room. 3 days earlier, Ashley had hugged me so hard after checking the lottery numbers that she nearly knocked my old reading glasses off my face. "Dad, we're rich," she screamed in the middle of the Shell gas station parking lot off Route 9. I remember the smell of gasoline and summer asphalt rising through the heat while strangers gathered around us clapping and cheering. For one brief second, I thought maybe life had finally decided to give us something back. Maybe all those years working double shifts at the machine shop, all those winters with frozen fingers and overdue electric bills, had finally led somewhere good. I should have known better. Money doesn't change people. It just removes whatever mask was keeping the rest of us comfortable. Ashley stood near the head of the table in a silk cream dress I'd never seen before, one hand resting on Brian's shoulder like she belonged in a commercial for luxury condos and expensive wine subscriptions. 6 months ago, she drove a used Honda with a cracked bumper. Tonight, she spoke differently. Slower, colder, like every sentence had already been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Brian and I have been looking at properties near Scottsdale," she continued. "Gated communities, golf courses, real security." Brian nodded while cutting into his filet mignon. "No offense, Richard, but this neighborhood's kind of depressing." I smiled faintly and took another sip of tea. The ice had melted completely. "No offense taken," I said. Ashley laughed softly. "See? Dad gets it." There was a time that laugh used to mean something warm. Back when she was 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders during county fairs, cotton candy stuck to her fingers while fireworks burst over the Ohio sky. Back when she cried after her mother died and slept outside my bedroom door for nearly a year because she was scared everyone she loved would disappear. I worked 16-hour shifts after Diane passed just to keep the mortgage paid and food in the fridge. Missed birthdays, missed sleep, missed half my own life, making sure Ashley never felt poor. Strange how quickly sacrifice becomes invisible once people smell money. Dinner dragged on while conversations drifted toward investment portfolios and vacation homes neither of them understood. Ashley barely looked at me anymore unless she needed another story about how hard life used to be. Somewhere between dessert and coffee, Brian slid a glossy brochure across the table toward me. The front showed smiling gray-haired couples standing outside a retirement community beside a lake. Sunny Acres Senior Living. My thumb stopped against the edge of the paper. Ashley finally met my eyes. "Dad," she said gently, almost professionally, "we've been talking and honestly, this might be better for everyone." The room got quiet enough for me to hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen. "Better?" I asked. Brian leaned back in his chair. "You've worked hard your whole life. Time to relax." Ashley folded her hands together like she was explaining something reasonable to a child. "And if Brian and I are going to start this new chapter, we need space. Privacy. A clean start." The chandelier light reflected in her wine glass while she said it. Cold red reflections dancing across crystal. "You're asking me to leave my own house." She inhaled slowly. "Dad, it's not really your house anymore if we're being honest." Nobody spoke after that. Not immediately. The silence spread heavy across the dining room, while somewhere outside a dog barked down the block. Brian cleared his throat and stared at the table. One of Ashley's friends suddenly became very interested in her phone. Ashley kept her eyes fixed on me like she was waiting for a scene. Waiting for anger. Waiting for the old working-class father with grease under his fingernails to explode and embarrass himself in front of people who already thought less of him. Instead, I reached for the brochure and folded it neatly down the middle. Calm. Careful. Like folding a hospital bill after bad news. "How long do I have?" I asked quietly. Ashley blinked, almost surprised. 72 hours should be enough. I nodded once. I see. Then I stood up slowly from the table, knees stiff from 62 years of hard floors and overtime shifts. The room watched me in complete silence. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair and slipped it on without rushing. Ashley looked relieved. That hurt more than the words. I walked toward the hallway, stopped beside the family photos hanging on the wall, and stared for a second at a picture from Disney World when Ashley was 12. She had ice cream all over her face and both arms wrapped around my neck like I was the safest man alive. Funny how fast people rewrite history once they think they own the future. I reached into my coat pocket and felt my phone pressing against my palm. Then I looked back toward the dining room and smiled faintly. One thing, though, I said. Ashley tilted her head. What? I pulled my phone out and dialed a number from memory. Freeze everything, I said calmly when the line connected. Brian frowned immediately. Ashley's smile disappeared inch by inch. And for the first time all night, the room finally became quiet enough for everyone to hear my heartbeat. I slept in my truck that night behind a 24-hour laundromat off Interstate 71 with the windows cracked just enough to let the October air roll through. The cold smelled like wet pavement and dryer sheets drifting from the vents on the side of the building. My back ached from the driver's seat, and my right knee locked every time I tried to stretch it. Funny thing about getting older. Your body keeps receipts even when your family does not. Around 3 a.m, rain started tapping lightly against the windshield. I sat there watching little rivers slide down the glass, while Ashley's face replayed in my head over and over again. Not angry, not emotional. Calm. That was the part one could not shake. The same little girl who used to leave hand-drawn birthday cards on my workbench had looked me in the eye and handed me a retirement brochure like she was canceling a cable subscription. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, but sleep never really came. Memories did instead. Diane always used to say Ashley had my heart before she even learned to walk. She was right. When Ashley was 6 years old, she climbed onto my lap one winter during a power outage while snow covered the whole neighborhood outside. We sat wrapped in blankets eating canned soup heated over a propane camping stove because the electric company had shut us off 2 days before payday. Ashley looked up at me with those big blue eyes and whispered, "It is okay, Daddy. I like candlelight better anyway." That sentence broke me harder than any overdue bill ever could. So I worked harder. That became my answer to everything. More hours, more shifts, more sacrifice. I spent 31 years at Halpern Industrial Fabrication, standing beside machines loud enough to rattle your bones. 12-hour shifts turned into 16 during busy seasons. Summers inside the shop felt like standing inside an oven. Temperatures hit 110 degrees near the welding stations some afternoons. In winter, the cold crept through the steel walls and settled into your joints until even your coffee tasted tired. But every paycheck meant Ashley stayed fed. Ashley stayed warm. Ashley got opportunities one never had. I missed fishing trips, missed birthdays, missed sleep. Once worked 83 straight days without a full day off because Ashley needed braces and her college tuition payment landed the same month the transmission blew in Diane's old Buick. Nobody applauds men for surviving quietly. They just expect it. After Diane died from breast cancer 14 years ago, the house became unbearably silent. Ashley was 20 then, young enough to still need a parent, old enough to start drifting away. I remember standing alone in the kitchen after the funeral staring at a sink full of dishes while rain hit the gutters outside. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. And for the first time in my life, I understood what loneliness actually sounded like. But Ashley kept me going. Or maybe the idea of her did. I packed her lunches when she was in nursing school, paid half her rent when she could not make ends meet, sold Diane's wedding ring after Ashley totaled her car during an ice storm sophomore year because she needed another vehicle to finish clinical rotations. I told myself family worked like a savings account. You put love in for years, and eventually it comes back when life gets hard. Turns out some people only learn how to withdraw. Around sunrise, I drove toward the lake outside town with a gas station coffee balanced between my knees. The sky looked pale gray over the water, and thin fog rolled across the shoreline like cigarette smoke. My phone stayed silent. No text from Ashley. No apology. No panic. Just silence. That told me more than words ever could. I parked beside the boat ramp and stared at the old tackle box in the passenger seat. Diane gave me that tackle box 25 years ago for Father's Day. Back when life still felt steady. Back before money entered the room and turned my daughter into someone I barely recognized. I rubbed my thumb across the worn metal latch and finally checked my voicemail. 3 new messages. The first was from Ashley asking where I had gone. The second was Brian wanting to clear up confusion. The third came from Daniel Reeves. Calm voice. Professional. Richard, the freeze order went through at 6:12 this morning. Call me when you are ready. Things are about to move quickly. I stared out at the lake while cold wind rattled the truck doors softly. Then I smiled for the first time in 2 days. By noon the rain had burned off, and the town looked painfully ordinary again. Minivans lined the grocery store parking lot. Kids in football jerseys crossed Main Street, holding gas station sodas bigger than their heads. Somewhere a lawn-mower hummed behind a row of brick ranch houses while life kept moving like nothing had happened. Funny thing about humiliation. The world does not pause for it. I drove downtown with Daniel's voicemail still echoing in my head and parked outside his office across from the county courthouse. The building used to be an insurance agency back in the 1980s. Brown brick, faded awning, narrow windows with blinds tilted halfway shut like the place was tired of seeing bad news every day. Daniel Reeves opened the door before I even reached the front steps. Mid-50s, silver hair, navy tie loosened at the collar. The kind of lawyer who looked more like a high school principal than a man capable of dismantling somebody's financial future with a single document. You look exhausted, he said quietly. I feel 62, I answered. That earned the faintest smile from him. His office smelled like coffee and old paper. Legal folders stacked neatly across every surface. Framed degrees on the wall beside photographs of his fishing trips in northern Michigan. Calm room. Steady room. The opposite of the chaos sitting in my chest. Daniel closed the door behind us and slid a folder across the desk. Ashley tried accessing the payout account this morning. I stared down at the folder without opening it. And she learned very quickly that she does not own what she thought she owned. I leaned back slowly in the chair while sunlight pressed weakly through the blinds across the carpet. My hands felt strangely steady now, like the storm had already passed through and left only debris behind. Did she sound angry? I asked. Daniel exhaled softly through his nose. Confused first, then upset, then demanding. He tapped the folder once with his index finger. The bank contacted me after she claimed there had been some kind of mistake. There it was again. That word. Mistake. Funny how people call it a mistake when consequences finally arrive. Daniel opened the folder carefully and turned several pages toward me. Copies of the trust documents. Signature pages. Lottery commission forms. Everything neat and official in thick black ink. You did the right thing signing the ticket immediately, he said. Most people wait. Most people panic. You did not. I remembered the exact moment. 3 nights after the win. Ashley asleep upstairs while Brian sat in my kitchen talking about vacation properties in Arizona like the money had already cleared. I had stood alone under the stove light staring at that ticket for nearly 20 minutes. $10 million resting between my fingers while the refrigerator hummed quietly behind me. Some instinct deep inside me had started whispering before Ashley ever changed the locks. Maybe fathers notice things before they allow themselves to admit them. The entitlement in Brian's voice. The way Ashley suddenly interrupted me mid-sentence around company. The way she stopped asking if I had eaten dinner after work. Small cracks. Hairline fractures. Money just widened them fast enough for me to finally see daylight through the walls. The trust owns everything now, Daniel continued. Legally speaking, the payout never belonged to Ashley or Brian. Not even partially. I nodded slowly. And the house. Daniel slid another document forward. Temporary legal hold. Since the down payment came directly from restricted funds under active review, they cannot sell, refinance, or transfer anything until this gets resolved. Outside the office window, a siren wailed somewhere downtown before fading into traffic. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the desk and stared at the paperwork. Funny, my whole life I built things with my hands because I trusted sweat more than paperwork. Steel beams, engine parts, conveyor systems, real things. Yet now a stack of paper was doing what 30 years of sacrifice never could. It was forcing my daughter to finally see me clearly. My phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. Ashley. Her name filled the screen beside a photo I took 15 years ago at Cedar Point. She had braces back then and cotton candy stuck to her cheek. For one dangerous second, my chest tightened. Memory is cruel like that. It keeps showing you ghosts wearing the faces of people still alive. Daniel glanced toward the phone, but said nothing. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad. Her voice sounded thin now, stripped of confidence. Ashley, something is wrong with the accounts. Silence stretched briefly between us. I could hear traffic in the background on her end. Maybe she was pacing outside the bank. Maybe Brian was standing nearby whispering instructions into her ear. The bank says the money is locked. I looked down at the trust papers spread across the desk, then toward the window where cold autumn sunlight washed across the courthouse steps outside. Nothing is wrong, I said calmly. Everything is finally working exactly the way it is supposed to. The line went dead after that. No yelling, no dramatic speech, just silence settling into my ear like snowfall. I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket while Daniel gathered the papers neatly into their folder again. Outside the office window, courthouse flags snapped sharply in the afternoon wind, and people hurried along the sidewalk carrying coffee cups and grocery bags like ordinary life still made sense. Mine had started feeling unreal the moment Ashley looked at me like I was temporary. Daniel loosened his tie slightly and leaned back in his chair. She is going to push hard, he said. People usually do when they realize money is not where they thought it was. I nodded once. Ashley was never materialistic growing up. Even saying it out loud sounded like I was trying to convince myself. Daniel studied me carefully before answering. Richard, sometimes people are not greedy until opportunity gives them permission. That sentence stayed with me the rest of the day. I drove back toward the old neighborhood around 4 o'clock with the radio off and both hands resting on the wheel. The sky had turned heavy again. Dark clouds stretched low over Ohio farmland while wind pushed dead leaves across the road in little spinning circles. Autumn always made this town look older than it really was. Tired porches, rusted mailboxes, bare trees standing like skeletons over quiet streets. I passed Halpern Industrial on the edge of town and slowed instinctively. The same gray building where I spent most of my adult life stood behind chain-link fencing with smoke drifting from the roof vents into the cold air. Men in hard hats crossed the parking lot carrying lunchboxes and thermoses while forklifts beeped somewhere beyond the loading docks. My chest tightened unexpectedly. 31 years inside that place, and I could still smell machine oil just by driving past. I remembered every overtime shift. Every winter morning scraping ice off the windshield at 4:30 before heading into work while the rest of town stayed asleep. I remembered eating vending machine dinners beside hydraulic presses because Ashley needed textbooks that semester. Nobody at the plant ever called me extraordinary. Reliable maybe. Quiet. The kind of man who never missed a shift unless somebody died. But reliability is invisible until it disappears. I parked across the street and sat there for a long time watching the building. The inside lights glowed pale yellow against the storm clouds gathering overhead. Somewhere behind those walls, younger men were probably complaining about long hours and bad management while checking their phones every 10 minutes. I used to do the same before life sanded the edges off me. Eventually, survival becomes routine. You stop asking whether anybody notices your sacrifice because asking hurts worse than the answer. My phone buzzed again around sunset. This time it was Brian. I let it ring twice before answering. Richard, he said immediately, voice tight with forced calm. Funny thing about confident men. Panic changes their breathing first. We need to sit down and clear this misunderstanding up. I stared through the windshield at the factory entrance while rain started tapping lightly against the glass again. There is no misunderstanding. Ashley is upset. Ashley was not upset when she threw me out. Silence. Then a quieter tone. More careful now. Look, emotions got high. We all said things. I almost smiled at that. We all. Like humiliation was some group activity everybody accidentally participated in together. Did you move my tools yet? I asked calmly. Brian hesitated. What? The toolbox in the garage. Did you move it out with the rest of my things? Another pause. No, good, I said softly. Do not touch it. Something in my voice must have unsettled him because his own dropped lower immediately. Richard, listen to me. Ashley loves you. I closed my eyes for a second while rain slid down the windshield in crooked silver lines. Diane used to say real love sounded different when people were afraid. Less polished. More honest. People do strange things under stress, Brian continued. The money changed everything fast. There it was again. Money. Always money. Nobody talked about family anymore without attaching dollar signs to the sentence. I opened my eyes and looked toward the darkening factory skyline. No, I said quietly. The money did not change anything. It just showed me what was already there. The line stayed silent after that except for Brian breathing softly on the other end. Then finally he asked the question both of them had been circling around all day. What happens now? I watched workers leaving the factory parking lot under the rain with tired shoulders and lunch pails swinging beside their legs. Men who would go home tonight believing sacrifice still guaranteed loyalty. Men who had not learned yet that sometimes the people you build your life for start measuring your worth the second they think you have outlived your usefulness. I rested my forehead lightly against the cold steering wheel and answered honestly. Now, I said, Ashley learns the difference between having access to money and actually earning it. That night, I checked into a roadside motel 12 miles outside town, where the carpet smelled faintly like bleach and old cigarettes no matter how many air fresheners management plugged into the walls. The neon vacancy sign outside blinked red through the curtains in slow, uneven pulses, washing the room in colors that made everything look tired. I sat on the edge of the mattress with my boots still on and stared at the paper cup of coffee cooling beside the television. Somewhere in the next room, a couple argued quietly through thin walls before silence swallowed them again. Funny how loneliness gets louder after midnight. My phone stayed face down on the nightstand for almost an hour before I finally picked it up. 11 missed calls from Ashley. 4 from Brian. 2 voicemails from unknown numbers I assumed belonged to bankers or real estate people suddenly discovering their commission checks were floating in legal limbo. I deleted nothing. Just listened to the silence between notifications while rain tapped softly against the motel window. Around 10:30 another call came through. Ashley again. This time I answered. Dad. Her voice cracked slightly on the word. Not fully broken yet, but close enough to hear strain underneath it. I leaned back slowly against the headboard and looked toward the ceiling water stain above the bathroom door. What happened at the bank? She asked. I could hear movement behind her. Cabinet doors. Footsteps. Brian speaking somewhere farther away in low, frustrated bursts. Daniel explained everything this afternoon, I said calmly. The funds are protected under the trust. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then came the version of Ashley I barely recognized now. Sharper voice. Colder edges. You set this up behind our backs. Our backs. Funny phrase. Like I had betrayed a team I never realized I was playing against. I protected what legally belonged to me. You think this is funny? She snapped. Do you have any idea how humiliating today was? I almost laughed at that. Not because it was amusing, because life has a cruel sense of timing. 48 hours earlier, she stood in my kitchen discussing nursing homes over cheesecake, while her friends watched me like expired furniture. Humiliation only mattered once it reached her doorstep. I rubbed my thumb slowly along the motel room, key resting beside me on the bedspread. Cheap plastic. Room 17 printed in faded white numbers. You already bought the Scottsdale property? I asked quietly. Ashley exhaled sharply through her nose. The down payment bounced. I see. Brian had contractors scheduled. We already announced everything online. People know about this. There it was. Not fear. Not regret. Reputation. The modern version of survival. Somewhere along the line, Ashley stopped caring how things felt and started caring how they looked. Dad, people are asking questions. I stared out the motel window at headlights sliding across wet pavement outside. Then answer them honestly. Honestly, she repeated bitterly. You froze $10 million because you got your feelings hurt. That sentence settled into the room slowly. Heavy. Familiar. Men my age hear versions of it all the time. Like pain only counts when somebody else approves of it first. I closed my eyes briefly and saw Diane standing in our old kitchen 20 years ago wearing one of my flannel shirts while spaghetti sauce simmered on the stove. Richard, she used to tell me, people reveal themselves when they think they no longer need you. Back then I thought she meant strangers. Not our daughter. Ashley, I said quietly, when your mother died, I worked 19 straight days because the hospital bills were due. Silence on the line. I sold her wedding ring so you could finish nursing school. More silence. And 3 nights after we won that money, You handed me a brochure for assisted living like I was an inconvenience standing between you and a better zip code. Her breathing changed after that. Softer now, less defensive, but not apologetic yet. Pride dies slowly in some people. That is not fair, she whispered. No, I answered calmly. Fair would have been remembering who sat beside your hospital bed when you had pneumonia at 13. Fair would have been remembering who skipped meals so you could have braces. The motel air conditioner rattled loudly for a few seconds before shutting off again. Outside, rainwater hissed beneath passing tires on the highway. Ashley spoke so quietly next I almost missed it. Brian said you would eventually understand. There it was. The crack in the wall. Not Ashley's idea alone. Influence leaves fingerprints if you know where to look. I stared at the darkness outside the window while cold neon light washed across the room in soft red pulses. Brian understands money, I said. I understand loyalty. Another long silence settled between us. Then finally Ashley asked the question hiding beneath every conversation since this started. What do you want from me? I looked down at my rough hands resting against the motel blanket. Hands that built engines, paid mortgages, buried a wife, raised a daughter who forgot too quickly where she came from. I wanted a family, I said softly. The money just proved I did not have one anymore. The next morning arrived gray and cold enough to make the motel windows fog around the edges. I woke before sunrise out of habit, same as I had for 3 decades at Halpern Industrial, and sat quietly at the small table beside the window with a stale blueberry muffin and burnt coffee from the lobby downstairs. The television murmured low in the background about stock markets and celebrity divorces while 18-wheelers hissed along the interstate outside. Strange how the world keeps talking about money like it solves loneliness. My phone stayed quiet for almost an hour. No calls from Ashley. No messages from Brian. Just silence stretching wider between us with every passing minute. Around 7:15 Daniel called. You need to see this, he said without greeting. There was something different in his voice this time. Less controlled. More alert. I drove downtown under a sky the color of wet cement while cold wind pushed dead leaves across empty parking lots. The courthouse clock read 8:03 when I parked outside Daniel's office again. He already had papers spread across his desk by the time I walked in. Thick folders, bank statements, real estate contracts, printed emails. The room smelled strongly of fresh coffee and tension. Daniel removed his glasses slowly and rubbed the bridge of his nose before speaking. Ashley and Brian moved fast. I sat across from him quietly. How fast? He slid one document toward me. Scottsdale Luxury Property Reservation Agreement. $2.4 million. Another page followed. Interior designer invoices. High-end furniture deposits. Private club memberships. I stared at the numbers while something heavy settled deeper into my chest. Not because of the money itself. Because Ashley never even paused long enough to ask whether I was okay sleeping in my truck while all this was happening. There is more, Daniel continued carefully. He handed me printed screenshots from social media. Ashley standing beside champagne towers. Brian smiling beside luxury cars inside dealership showrooms. Captions about new beginnings and finally living the life we deserve. We deserve. Funny phrase. The people who sacrifice rarely include themselves in sentences like that. I leaned back slowly in the chair while sunlight crept weakly through the office blinds. She already spent the money in her head, I said quietly. Daniel nodded once. And apparently with several vendors too. He hesitated before adding the next part. Richard. Brian also contacted financial advisors about moving portions of the payout offshore once funds cleared. That one landed differently. Cold. Sharp. Like opening a door and realizing strangers had already been walking through your house. I looked down at my rough hands resting against the armrests. Same hands that taught Ashley how to ride a bicycle in an empty church parking lot after her mother died. Same hands that stayed up nights helping her practice multiplication tables at the kitchen counter while exhaustion sat behind my eyes like concrete. Somewhere along the line my daughter stopped seeing sacrifice as love and started seeing it as weakness. Daniel turned another page toward me. This came from the realtor involved in the Scottsdale property. I scanned the printed email slowly. Ashley had described me as elderly family baggage, delaying the transition timeline for their new life. Elderly family baggage. The words sat there in black ink while the room suddenly felt too small to breathe properly. Not because they were cruel, because they sounded rehearsed. like she had been carrying that version of me inside her head long before the lottery ticket ever existed. Daniel watched my face carefully. You do not have to read anymore today. But I kept reading. More emails. More contracts. More conversations where my existence appeared only as a logistical inconvenience. Assisted living discussions. Storage unit options for my belongings. Plans to renovate the house before Christmas once I was settled somewhere permanent. Every sentence peeled another layer off the illusion I had been protecting for years. Finally, I set the papers down and stared at the courthouse across the street through the office window. A young father walked by holding his little daughter's hand while she skipped through fallen leaves wearing a bright pink backpack almost bigger than she was. He looked tired already, probably working too many hours, probably telling himself it would all be worth it one day. I wanted to stop him somehow. Warn him that children grow up into strangers sometimes while you are busy paying electric bills and fixing broken appliances. Daniel's voice broke gently into my thoughts. What are you thinking? I exhaled slowly through my nose. I am thinking Diane would not recognize her. Silence settled between us after that. Then Daniel slid one final envelope across the desk. There is one more thing. I opened it carefully. Inside sat a formal request filed that morning by Brian's attorney seeking emergency access to frozen funds due to financial hardship. I stared at the page for several long seconds before something unexpected happened. I laughed, quiet at first, then harder, not because anything felt funny, because after 31 years surviving layoffs, hospital bills, funeral expenses, and overtime shifts, watching two healthy adults panic after 48 hours without instant wealth suddenly felt absurd. I folded the request neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. Diane used to say character shows fastest when comfort disappears, I murmured softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. Was she usually right? I looked back down at the paperwork covering his desk like evidence from a crime scene nobody thought counted because no blood was involved. Every single time. By Friday morning, the whole thing had started collapsing publicly. Small towns breathe through gossip the same way cities breathe through traffic, and once people sensed money trouble attached to a family everyone thought had suddenly become rich, the story spread faster than rainwater down a storm drain. I stopped at a diner outside Lebanon around 7:30 for eggs and black coffee, and caught two waitresses whispering near the counter while glancing toward a television mounted over the pie display. My name flashed across the local morning news ticker beneath some cheerful weather forecast. Lottery payout dispute under legal review. Funny how quickly your private pain becomes public entertainment once dollar signs get attached to it. I sat alone in a booth by the window while cold wind rattled the glass softly and pretended not to notice the looks from nearby tables. Across the diner, an older man in a John Deere cap nodded at me once before returning to his pancakes. Not judgment. Recognition. Men our age can spot exhaustion in each other without needing introductions. My phone buzzed halfway through breakfast. Daniel again. You need to turn on the news, he said quietly. I looked up toward the television mounted near the ceiling. The screen showed aerial footage of Ashley's neighborhood, while a blonde reporter stood outside the house holding a microphone against the wind. Luxury vehicle repossession activity had apparently arrived early that morning. I stared silently while tow trucks loaded Brian's leased Escalade onto a flatbed beneath gray Ohio skies. Neighbors stood outside pretending to collect mail while watching everything unfold. Curtains twitched behind windows up and down the block. The same people who toasted Ashley 3 nights earlier were now treating her like cautionary entertainment. The camera shifted suddenly, and there she was. Ashley stood barefoot on the driveway wearing oversized sunglasses and an expensive cream sweater despite the cold. Her face looked thinner already, more fragile somehow. Brian appeared behind her arguing with one of the tow operators while another truck backed slowly toward the driveway. Even through the television speakers I could hear panic bleeding through his voice now. Pressure strips polish off people fast. The Scottsdale deal officially collapsed this morning. Daniel continued through the phone. And Brian's emergency motion was denied. I looked down at my coffee while steam curled upward between my hands. How bad is it? There was a brief pause before he answered. Worse than they expected. Several deposits were non-refundable. Outside the diner window, a school bus rolled past carrying sleepy children with backpacks pressed against fogged glass. Life moving forward while someone else's world quietly came apart. I remembered Ashley at age 9 sitting beside me in the old Ford pickup eating fries after softball practice. Ketchup on her chin, ponytail crooked from running bases too hard. She once cried for 2 straight days because she accidentally stepped on a bird's nest while helping me rake leaves. That little girl used to apologize to insects. Somewhere between then and now, she learned how to look at her own father like unwanted furniture. There is more, Daniel said carefully. Brian left the house around dawn with luggage. I closed my eyes briefly. Not surprise, just disappointment arriving exactly on schedule. Men like Brian love comfort more than commitment. Did Ashley know? According to neighbors? The argument woke half the street. I leaned back slowly in the diner booth while rain began tapping lightly against the parking lot outside. Funny thing about collapse. It rarely happens all at once. It creaks first, groans, gives people chances to stop pretending they do not hear the structure failing underneath them. Then suddenly everybody acts shocked when the roof caves in. My phone buzzed again before Daniel could finish speaking. Ashley. I stared at her name across the screen while the television replayed footage of the tow trucks outside her house. You should answer, Daniel said softly. I ended his call and picked hers up instead. Dad. Her voice sounded wrecked now. No anger left. Just exhaustion and something dangerously close to fear. I looked around the diner quietly while forks scraped plates and coffee mugs clinked beneath ordinary conversation. Nobody here knew that 20 years ago, I once carried Ashley through this exact diner parking lot after she fell asleep in the truck on the drive home from Cincinnati. Her little arms wrapped around my neck while snow fell under yellow streetlights. Back then, protecting her felt as natural as breathing. Brian left, she whispered. I said nothing. He took his things this morning. Rainwater slid slowly down the diner window beside me, while somewhere near the kitchen somebody laughed too loudly at a joke that probably was not funny. Ashley inhaled shakily before speaking again. Dad, they are saying I might lose the house. There it was. Not grief over family. Not guilt. Fear of losing comfort. The final layer stripped clean. I stared out at the wet parking lot while cold November wind bent the American flag above the gas station across the street. Ashley, I said quietly, you already lost something far more important than a house. Silence swallowed the line completely after that. Sunday evening settled over the motel parking lot with freezing rain and the kind of gray sky that makes every neon sign look lonelier than it really is. I sat at the small table near the window, eating microwave chili from a paper bowl, while an old football game murmured softly from the television. Outside, headlights drifted through sheets of rain along the interstate like tired ghosts. The whole room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and damp carpet. I had spent most of the weekend signing paperwork with Daniel and ignoring calls from reporters who somehow dug my number out of public records. Apparently, America loves 2 things equally: lottery winners and public collapse. Around 7:40, there was a knock at my door. Not loud, just 2 quiet taps almost swallowed by the rain outside. I already knew who it was before I stood up. Funny thing about being a parent. You recognize your child's sadness even through a motel door. I opened it slowly, and there she stood beneath the flickering walkway light. Ashley looked smaller somehow. The expensive sweaters were gone. No jewelry. No makeup except faint mascara stains beneath tired blue eyes that looked too much like Diane's for comfort. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of her coat, while cold wind pushed loose strands of blonde hair across her face. For a second, neither of us spoke. The ice machine hummed somewhere down the walkway, while traffic hissed past beyond the parking lot. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside without answering. Ashley moved slowly into the room and stopped near the little table beside the television. Her eyes scanned everything without really focusing. The worn recliner. The cheap lamp. The paper coffee cups stacked beside the microwave. The entire place looked temporary because it was. Funny how quickly people notice discomfort once they have to stand inside it themselves. I closed the door gently behind her while rain rattled against the window. I did not know where else to go, she whispered. Her voice sounded raw now. Not polished. Not rehearsed. Just tired. I sat back down at the table and folded my hands quietly in front of me. What happened? She laughed softly through her nose. Not real laughter. The kind people make when humiliation exhausts them beyond tears. Everything. Ashley stared down at the carpet while speaking slowly. Brian had officially left that morning. The Scottsdale property deal collapsed completely. Creditors were calling nonstop. Friends who spent days celebrating beside champagne towers suddenly stopped answering texts. One couple even removed pictures with Ashley from social media overnight, like she carried something contagious. People act different when money disappears, she murmured. I almost said something then. Almost reminded her she learned that lesson from the wrong side first. But I stayed quiet instead. Silence teaches harder than speeches sometimes. Ashley wrapped her arms around herself against the cold and looked around the motel room again. You stayed here this whole time? She asked softly. Mostly. Her face tightened slightly, guilt finally arriving after the audience left. Dad. The word cracked halfway out of her throat. I was scared. I looked at her carefully for the first time since she arrived. Not the woman chasing luxury houses and online attention. Just my daughter standing in a cheap motel room, trying to hold herself together while life stripped everything artificial away piece by piece. Scared of what? I asked quietly. Ashley swallowed hard before answering. Being poor again. The rain outside intensified suddenly, hammering against the window hard enough to drown out the television for a few seconds. I leaned back slowly in the chair while her answer settled heavily between us. There it was. The real thing underneath all the arrogance and entitlement. Fear. Same fear I carried every time the electric bill arrived late after Diane got sick. Same fear that pushed me through double shifts and sleepless nights and 31 years beside factory machines loud enough to rattle my bones. The difference was simple. Fear made me work harder. Fear made Ashley forget who loved her. Do you know what poor actually feels like? I asked calmly. Ashley wiped beneath her eyes quickly and looked away. Dad, please. No. I continued quietly. Poor is sitting beside your wife in a hospital room pretending you are not counting the cost of chemotherapy in your head because she is already terrified enough. Ashley stared silently at the floor. Poor is skipping dinner so your daughter can eat before school field trips. My voice stayed calm the whole time. Calm hurts more sometimes. Poor is waking up every morning terrified life will take one more thing from you after it already took your wife. Tears finally slipped down Ashley's face then. Real ones this time. Not frustration. Not embarrassment. Grief. I know I messed up, she whispered shakily. I looked toward the motel window where red neon reflections shimmered across rainwater running down the glass. You did more than mess up. Silence stretched again while the old heater rattled unevenly near the wall. Ashley slowly sat down across from me at the little table and folded her trembling hands together exactly the way Diane used to whenever she felt ashamed. I do not care about the money anymore, she said quietly. I studied her face for a long moment before answering. That would have meant something before you try to throw me away with the furniture. Her breathing broke after that. She covered her mouth with one hand while tears slipped through her fingers onto the table. And for the first time since all this started, Ashley finally looked less like a stranger and more like somebody who understood exactly what she destroyed. Winter arrived early that year. By the first week of December, frost coated the motel parking lot every morning, and the trees along Interstate 71 stood bare against pale Ohio skies like old bones reaching upward. Life settled into something quieter after that night with Ashley. Not fixed, just quieter. Some wounds stopped bleeding before they actually heal. Daniel finalized the trust protections 2 weeks later, while the legal mess surrounding the frozen assets slowly untangled itself through paperwork and court hearings nobody outside town cared about anymore. Public attention fades fast once newer scandals arrive. 1 week it was our family on the evening news. The next week people moved on to politicians and celebrity divorces. That is the thing about humiliation. It feels permanent only to the people surviving it. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store downtown after leaving the motel. Old wood floors, radiator heat that clanked at night, a narrow kitchen with windows overlooking Main Street where Christmas decorations hung crookedly from lamp posts, while pickup trucks rolled slowly through slush-covered intersections below. It was not much, but it was peaceful. Some evenings I sat beside the window with black coffee warming my hands and watched snow drift softly beneath the streetlights while old country songs played low through the radio. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt hostile. Ashley called occasionally after that. Not every day, not even every week. Sometimes she left voicemails asking how I was doing. Sometimes she just apologized again in different words like she hoped rearranging the sentence might somehow reduce the damage underneath it. I answered when I felt ready. Healing works slower for people our age because memory weighs more. Around Christmas, she showed up carrying a small artificial tree and 2 boxes of ornaments she found in storage. Diane's ornaments. Hand-painted glass birds and little ceramic angels Ashley made in elementary school with crooked glitter wings. We decorated the apartment quietly together while snow fell outside the windows. No speeches. No dramatic reconciliation. Just silence and soft Christmas lights reflecting against old hardwood floors. Real love returns carefully after betrayal, like a stray dog approaching a hand too slowly to trust yet. Ashley eventually found work again at a medical clinic outside Dayton. Smaller paycheck, smaller apartment, smaller life overall. Funny enough, she sounded more like herself afterward. Less polished, less performative. Sometimes losing comfort removes the noise people mistake for happiness. Brian disappeared completely after the legal fallout. Last I heard, he moved to Florida chasing another business opportunity. Men like him survive by attaching themselves to optimism they did not build. I stopped thinking about him after January. He was never really the point anyway. Money was not the point either. Not anymore. By spring, I used part of the trust to open a vocational scholarship program through Halpern Industrial for young trade workers whose families could not afford certification programs or technical school tuition. Welding, fabrication, diesel mechanics. Honest work for kids who reminded me of myself at 22 with calloused hands and overdue bills. The first time I walked through the training facility during orientation, machine oil and fresh-cut steel filled the air while nervous young men and women stood beside workbenches trying to look tougher than they felt. One kid thanked me afterward with tears in his eyes because his father lost his job and he thought he would never afford trade school. That hit harder than the lottery ever did. Funny how purpose weighs more than money once you survive enough life to understand the difference. Some Sundays, Ashley joins me at the lake outside town where Diane and I used to fish years ago, before cancer and overtime and adulthood complicated everything. We sit quietly beneath old maple trees while cold wind ripples across the water and geese drift low over the shoreline heading south. Ashley talks more honestly now. About fear. About shame. About how quickly greed disguised itself as security once money appeared. I listen without interrupting much. Parents eventually realize grown children become strangers for a while before life slowly introduces them back properly. The scars remain, though. They always do. One evening near sunset, Ashley looked over at me while orange lights spilled across the lake and asked the question I think she had been carrying for months. Do you think Mom would be disappointed in me? I stared out across the water for a long moment before answering. Diane's old tackle box rested beside my boots in the grass, while wind moved softly through the trees overhead. I think your mother would be disappointed in the choices you made, I said quietly. Ashley lowered her eyes toward the dock. Then I looked at her carefully and continued. But she would also be proud you finally faced them. Tears filled her eyes again after that, but she smiled faintly through them this time. Not because everything was magically repaired, because honesty finally entered the room where money used to sit pretending to be love. The sun slipped lower behind the lake while cold spring air carried the smell of water and pine through the evening light. I leaned back in my chair and watched ripples spread slowly across the surface beneath the fading sky. Funny thing about $10 million. It did not destroy my family. It simply revealed which parts were built on love and which parts were built on convenience.